Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Grace, and I am the VP of Product for Macy's Digital. Super proud member of the board here at Women in Product. And I'm so excited to be talking to you today about building your management skills. So exciting. A little bit about me. After a career of leaning in, 25 years now in the digital space, when I became a leader, I found that it was particularly hard to learn how to lean back. Right? You spend so much time just like digging into everything, and then here comes this opportunity to lead, and you still want to be into those weeds. And so I kind of think about this in terms of Game of Thrones. Does anybody watch Game of Thrones? Thank you. Yes, I'm not alone. So you're Jon Snow, right? And you're like this amazing soldier, and like you love the heat of the battle, the clashing of the swords, getting face to face, and the blood and the sweat and the tears. But in doing so, your field of vision is really limited to what's directly in front of you. And you're just fighting because you're in that moment. But as you become a general, that means you have to exchange the thrill of that fight for a view from the top of the hill above the battle. Only from that view can you see the entire theater of war and where the enemy is advancing. Only from there can you tell your troops when to flank left or flank right, or when you can bring in your kind of backup cavalry, a la Sansa Stark on the top of the hill, if you remember the scene. So the moral of the story for me was learning that the art of leadership was as much in knowing when it's necessary to lean in, but equally important, learning how and when to lean out. And it's a challenging thing. So let's get this panel started. I wanted to start with a few questions of the audience. So let's start. How many of you, by raise of hands, are people managers today? Get them up high. Yes, awesome. A lot of you. Keep them up if you have less than 5 years experience as a manager. Still a lot of hands. And then keep them up if you have 1 year or less. Okay. Now, put them back down. How many of you who said you are people managers have felt overwhelmed or have struggled around how to become a great leader? Show me your hands. If you still struggle, if you've struggled or you still struggled, you see, it doesn't matter how much experience you have. We all struggle with this, and we have new challenges every day. But we're in luck because Zhou, who's the VP of Design for Facebook and has led the team responsible for design of the Facebook app, has a great new book called The Making of a Manager, What You Do When Everyone Looks to You. In this, it's a handbook for new managers, offering a woman's perspective and voice. And Julie examines the path for the newly minted manager, managing her way to confidence and wrestling with questions like, what's the best way to deliver bad news? Or how do I make meetings suck less? So please welcome Julie to the stage, please. Awesome, welcome, Julie. Good to see you. Awesome. Okay, one more question and answer, little thing. Raise your hand if you're a woman of color. Me too. Keep them up if you've ever felt like your experience is different than everyone else's. Oh, wow, amazing. So we're really thrilled today to have Minda Harts with us. She's the best-selling author of the Memo, What a Woman of Color Needs to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. She's also the founder and CEO of the Memo LLC, a career development company which provides tools and access and a robust community for women of color and for the companies they work for. Please join me in welcoming Minda. Woo! Hey, Minda, thank you so much. Awesome. Okay, let's get this panel going. So girls, I shared with you a little bit about my sort of vulnerability, learning to lean back, something I still kind of continue to work through. As you became leaders, what was the biggest challenge that you faced at the beginning?
For me, it was definitely asking for help. How many of you guys have trouble asking for help? Yeah, I was taught to grow up and really try and be independent. Try and pretend like I had it all. I've heard the phrase "fake it till you make it," all the way throughout as I was building my career, and so it was really hard for me to admit when I didn't know what was happening, or I didn't know what the answer was, or I was frankly stuck. And the hardest part for me was, in fact, when I came back from having my first baby. I was coming back. I was frankly going through a lot of postpartum depression. I was at work, and I remember, in every single one-on-one with my manager, I was bursting into tears, not knowing, how I was going to go back and manage the job and, figure out how to feel confident again. I think, looking back, it was because I didn't feel confident as a mother, and it was really seeping into every other aspect of my job and in my life. And the greatest lesson that I learned from that period was that it was okay to go and ask for help. I asked for help to get a coach who could help me, talk through some of the issues. I started to reach out to other women around me at my company and who I had known before. Other people had gone through being a new mother and going back to work. And I just realized that I didn't have to say yes to everything I was asked to do. I could also, say, hey, right now, this isn't the right thing for me, and maybe that'll change in 6 or 12 months. But, to kind of go easy on myself and to really ask for help when I needed it.
Awesome, thank you. How about you, Minda?
Yeah, I think that for me it was, for so long I had worked in roles where I wasn't managing people, so I was only focused on my own self and my own success, and so being a leader then requires you to be invested in your team and their strengths and weaknesses and how do you get the most out of their talent. And so I'm shifting my mindset and realizing I had to ask myself, what am I going to do to be invested in my team's success? And shifting my mindset to say success is a solo sport, so making sure that I'm cued into what everyone needs, not just myself. And I think that's a mind shift.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. So you've both written amazing books. I mean, first, congratulations. That's a huge effort.
Thank you.
And really,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you.
Can you each share a little bit about what inspired you to do it? What was your purpose in doing so? Share a little bit about that.
For me, it was, imagining myself back when I became a manager for the first time at the age of 25. And I had been at Facebook for a few years, and our company was growing. And my manager asked me to manage because she said, you really get along with everyone else on the team. And I was like, great, I'll do it. I'm here to do whatever the company needs me to do. But I really had no clue what I was doing as a manager. I remember going for my very first one-on-one with my report, who was previously a peer of mine, somebody who I considered much better at the job of designing than I was, and being like, how am I going to possibly be valuable to this person? And so I went to the bookstore, and I bought a lot of books about management and leadership, and I read them all. And obviously there's wonderful, great resources out there, but it was actually really hard to find something that was written by somebody who was similar to me, right? Who was a female, a woman of color, but also something that was really geared for me in that particular situation, which was, I don't know anything about management. I haven't been on a career path for 5 or 10 years, growing in my leadership. I'd just been thrust into this situation because I was at a fast-growing company, and I was being asked to lead and hire and build this team. And I frankly just didn't even know the basics. So what is the book that I wish I had? And I wished, it was someone who was sort of like me, sitting me down, talking to me in a way that was really accessible, and kind of actually laying out a lot of the foundations of management, from okay, how do you run a meeting, to how do you have a one-on-one, to what really is the job of a manager. And that was the book that I really wanted to write.
Oh, fantastic. It's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
Minda, how about you?
Yeah, so for me it's similar. Toni Morrison, she said, write the book that you want to read. And as a Black woman, I had read countless books written by a lot of white men and women, and they had really great advice, but I realized that they weren't always talking to me in my experiences. Yes, women, we do experience what some may call hierarchies of oppression, right? But in my world, I wasn't experiencing. And when you're the only one, it's very isolating and lonely. So some of that advice doesn't really cater to me. So there was a big business book out there called Lean In. Maybe some of you have heard of it. And I know Julie has. But what I realized was that a lot of women of color had been trying to lean in, and it's different when we do that. And so I decided that, okay, I'm not going to wait for someone else to write this book. I'm going to write it from the perspective of being a woman of color in the workplace and what it's like when we do lean in some of those difficulties. But then how do we secure that seat at the table once we do get there? And so the memo was really a love letter to women of color to say, I see you. I understand that maybe you haven't been reading about your experiences, but let's talk about it and let's move forward, because we all deserve the right to thrive in the workplace and not just survive.
Yeah. Woo! It's so good. And so let's stay with that for just a minute. Can you talk to us a little bit about the challenges that women of color face and what we can do to sort of support each other through that?
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for asking that question. And I think that was part of writing the memo, is that oftentimes a lot of people don't know what it's like for us to show up every day at the office. And one story that I tell is my government name is Yasminda, but I never was able, in 15 years in corporate America, I never went by Yasminda because my colleagues didn't want to say it. They were afraid to pronounce it. I thought about the bias that people would see when they pulled up my resume. And so from a young girl, I realized that that made people feel uncomfortable. And so I contorted myself to be the model minority so that people wouldn't look at my ethnicity and all these different things thinking that's what I had to do. And I think as women of color, we're thinking about some of these conscious and unconscious biases before we even start the job description. And it's really hard to be your authentic self when you have to change your name or feel you have to and all of these different things. And so I feel like as women, how can we be better allies to one another? You have to understand what it's like for me to show up every day, right? And so part of that book is not just for women of color, but it's also for our managers to know what it's like when the Trayvon Martins happen in the world and you're the only person of color and nobody talks about it in the office. You know, those are very taxing for some of us. And so I think it's important to understand who you're supporting. And again, success is not a solo sport. So you want a manager who's invested in who you are as a person in a culture.
Can we just stay with you for 1 second? I'd like to dig in just a little bit more. Can you model like how to begin that kind of conversation? Like, can you maybe role play or what have you? But how do you go there? Right?
Go to mindaharts.com. You can bring me in for. Just kidding. But I think that goes back to having courageous conversations.
Right.
I think oftentimes we, especially as women of color, we've learned to silence our voices. And oftentimes we say, oh, they didn't mean any harm, and you swipe it under the rug. And so we never get a chance to give ourselves permission to talk about some of those things. And I look back on my career and I think, had I activated my voice in a way to tell my manager, one time my manager saw that I had orange fingernail polish on, and he said, you people love your bright colors. Yeah. And then he went on to make jokes with another colleague to say that 15 minutes they joked around about how black people love bright colors. In that moment, I didn't say anything. I didn't know if I could, didn't know if I should. And how do you have those kind of conversations, right? And so I think it's important that we talk about how we each experience the workplace and what type of managers need to understand that those are not appropriate things. Maybe he didn't mean any harm, but it still was inappropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure, I wish I would have had Julie's book to give that to him. Yeah.
We'll be talking about toxic managers in just a minute. Absolutely. So actually, let's go to that, Julie, then for a minute. So you talk about the difference between good and great managers. Can you share a little bit more about like kind of your philosophy there?
Yeah. You know, I boiled down management, and I didn't actually know this when I started managing. It's something that I learned, you know, many years down the line. But actually, you know, management, like any other role, like there's an outcome that you're trying to shoot for, right? And the thing is like you have to be the one to define the outcome, you or your organization. But clearly you're trying to get a talented group of people together to achieve something. And that is how managers should judge themselves. Ultimately, it's got to be about long-term success for the thing that you and this group of people came to do. And as a manager, you know, you've got a lot of levers at your disposal. A lot of it is more honestly art than science, but it really comes down to, are you able to help bring in the best people, the best talent, and leverage their strengths to achieve this outcome? Are you able to help these people work together through great processes? And finally, are you able to help rally these people around a great and common shared purpose? Because if everyone has like a different idea of what success is, then they're not all going to be like marching towards the, you know, same direction, the parade or beat of the drummer, or whatever that analogy is. But that ultimately is going to be how managers need to judge themselves, not on like short-term results, like not about like the next quarter or the next year,
right.
But sustainably, is this team able to consistently achieve at the top level?
Mm-hmm. So it can't be a women's conference if we don't talk about imposter syndrome. So let's put it out there. Apparently, it's very prevalent among managers. So I'd love for you both to share a little bit about maybe imposter syndrome, how you see it, and then is it different for women of color? The same, a little bit on that.
I think for managers or leaders in any capacity, I think imposter syndrome is incredibly common because think about it, you are doing things that maybe no one else has done before, or that you have never done before, right? The analogy that I always give is like, as a manager, there's going to be a time and place where you're going to have to tell someone that this isn't the right team for them, that maybe you're going to have to let them go, or that this isn't the right match. And it's really, really hard to practice this conversation. Like, you can't just go home and like, oh, I'm practicing drawing, let me like take out my sketchbook. Like, you can't practice firing someone. You need to kind of be in the environment, where it's real and it's contextual and it's about this particular person, not about, sort of a faceless, like dummy that you're practicing with. And you're always going to be nervous the very first time you go through that because, it's new. And even, now having been managing for 10 years, like, I'm continually put in situations that I've never had to deal with before, things like, the ebbs and flows of the news cycle, or, the new, dilemma that my team is facing that we've never encountered. And all of those stretch me and make me feel uncomfortable, and I don't feel prepared, and I don't feel like I know exactly what to do. But that will always be the case, sort of no matter where you are in your career, there's always going to be new challenges. And so I think it's normal to feel that, right? It's normal to feel like, wow, like, am I cut out to do this? I think the thing we do learn, and that, gives us, hopefully makes it easier each time, is that we know there will always be new challenges, but maybe we've developed a better toolkit for how to encounter those challenges, such that the new and the scary become things that we know like having done it before, we know we can, because we've gotten through so many challenges, we know we can get through the next one as well.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely. I think for women of color, especially I think Black women in particular, we don't hold as many leadership roles in many companies. And so when we do ascend to this space, we're thinking, what are they thinking? Am I a diversity hire? All of these different emotional taxes are being like swarming around in our heads. And I would say, let's redefine the narrative. You worked very hard to get there, and don't forget that you're here because they need you here, regardless of whatever reasons it might be. But I think taking that, and I live in New York City, and so I say having that empire state of mind, knowing that you worked hard to get here. So whenever that imposter syndrome creeps up, pushing it behind, knowing that you deserve to be here. And we're doing this for the next generation of women and women of color. And we're holding this space and securing our seat. And for me, I think it's been hard getting in those spaces when you've been the only one, and now you're in a management position or a leadership role, and you're trying to prove yourself already being in the environment, and then you feel like you have to work 10 times harder so that your peers respect you in that moment. And I know one of the things I do is teach at NYU, and even in that role, I teach a leadership course, and one of my students said, I'm 30 years old and I've never had a Black woman as a professor.
Wow.
And in those moments, you realize how much weight that is to try to get it right and do it right, because there's never been anyone in this position. And I think, again, people don't understand how much weight that holds as women of color. And so I think it's important that we have the dialogue and you have support systems so that you can release that, because I think it's important to do that so that we can heal and be the best managers that we can be.
No, absolutely. That's good. So staying with you, Minda, then, let's talk about how do you hire a diverse team? What are some things we can do to practically ensure that we're doing that?
Yeah. One of the things that I do in my class is I role play with the students in terms of I have them bring in their, some of them are already working out in the field, and so bringing in their job descriptions and their interview questions that they're typically asking, and we go through them in assimilation, because I think that sometimes those questions and Julia would probably be the expert in this, but some of those questions can be very biased. And so if we're standardizing the questions that we ask and not going off into our own, oh, you're from Texas, I'm from Texas, and maybe we never even get to if you can actually do the job, but because we're both like, to go to the Golden Corral or whatever, I don't know.
Maybe not there, but I mean.
that now you're the person for the job, right? And so it just takes out those who could be. And I think also that intentionality, being intentional about the diverse slate of candidates that you bring. We all know that certain percentages of candidates are not representative inside of our company. So what are we doing to make sure that they're part of the interview process? You can't have access to an opportunity without that access, right? And so I think just being very intentional, I don't think it's rocket science on how to diversify, but making sure we're intentional about everything that we do.
No, I think that's super right. I mean, it's certainly for me, going to your HR partners and say, I'm not going to fill this role unless I have seen a diverse slate. And that includes, beyond race, it includes, sexual identity, it includes ageism, their age and all of that. So just really being specific about this is important to me and I will not hire until I've gotten this. So Julie, one crucial part of we were talking about here is hiring as a manager. So, you don't have a lot of time sometimes when you're interviewing someone and you just have that 45 minutes, an hour. How do you ensure that you're getting just the right candidate? How do you build that?
Yeah. And I wanted to, double down on what Minda said, because I think intentionality is super critical. I always do exercise at the start of the year where I think about, okay, I have this many slots to hire for. What do I want my team to look like at the end of that year? What are the strengths that we currently have that maybe the next person can stand to be a little bit weaker in, but what are also the areas that we need to grow as a team in terms of skill sets, in terms of, the diversity that we want, in terms of the diversity of thought or experiences, And that way, every person that you interview, you don't have to sort of look at them in isolation and is like, do I like this person or not? You can look at them in the context of this kind of, ideal team, this dream team that you want. And you can ask yourself, is this the best person who is going to bring our team, closer to that vision of the ideal? And if not, then it's a little bit easier to say, maybe this person is a great candidate for some other team, but maybe isn't the one for us right now. I think the other thing that also helps, is that I'm a big fan of just transparency of the values of your team, your culture, and your style in the interview process. For a long time, I used to feel like, interviewing was sort of like, you're trying to catch fish. You wanted to be able to come home with a nice bounty, and you wanted to be able to fill the roles as quickly as you could. But I realized that what that incentivized is, you would go out and you would try and I would try my hardest to try and get this person on my team, and I would try and say all the things that I thought this person wanted to hear about why this team was so great and how they, everything they wanted this team could provide. And then they would start, and then it just wouldn't work out, because you can't really, sell a square peg into a round hole. So it actually works a lot better in the long run for you to be completely transparent about, here's how the team, here are our values, here's how we want to work, and you can then help that person self-select and also be able to judge whether they are the best fit for your team. Because if they realize, hey, what you're saying, that's not what I'm looking for, that's not what, better for us to have that conversation in that hiring process than 6 months later, where it's going to be a much more painful and difficult conversation.
And how do you get them to be transparent back? Because so often in an interview, right, they're saying what they think you want to hear back, right? So how do you elicit that authenticity back?
For me, I think a lot of times just laying it out like that, just saying, look, for me, you want to be able to be in a place, an environment where you're going to be, rewarded for the things that you're great at, where you're going to be able to work on the mission and the problems that you deem valuable. And I want the same for my team. And so it's kind of like dating, right? And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just means this wasn't the best fit. And honestly, life's too short for us to, be working with in an environment that isn't the ideal for what we want to do with our lives. And so sometimes by saying that and just saying, I'm going to commit to being as transparent with you about what our team's challenges are and what you might like or not like, and I hope that you'll do the same about what you care about and what your values are.
I love that. So just inviting them to bring that authenticity back. That's great. So Minda, let's talk about that toxic boss thing. Can you give us some warning signs of a toxic manager and sort of how to manage up? And then I'll pivot to Julie to say, how do we make sure that we don't become toxic managers? So with Minda.
Yeah, I also want to just echo something that Julie said, is reminding yourself as women that we have options. I think sometimes we forget that we specialize in trying to make everything work, and reminding yourself that you have options, you're in demand, the skill set that you have is in demand, and so if it doesn't work here, it doesn't mean that there's not another table waiting for you. And I think sometimes we've been in toxic work environments that so long that we forget that we are the prize and that we have so much to offer, because those toxic work environments do beat you down. And so I think when you're being mistreated at work, when you don't no longer, when you're more so venting and gossiping about work and how much you hate being there, those are signs of toxic work environment. You no longer want to go to the birthday party in the break room. Like you don't want to be involved in anything that has to do with socializing. All of those things are important. Also, thinking about how maybe if you are contributing to a toxic environment. So are you CCing people that have no business being CC'd on, I mean, for real, okay? And if you're a manager, you shouldn't allow that either. You should nip that in the bud because that's creating a toxic environment on the team. And so building those relationships with your teammates so that you can at least give people the benefit of the doubt of addressing some situations. But I think those are some of the warning signs that you're on a toxic team, and maybe having a conversation with your manager about some of these dynamics to make it better. And love to hear Julie's thought.
I think the biggest thing you can do as a manager to try and make your team and your environment not toxic is open yourself up to feedback. And that's hard because you are in a position of power, right? So the responsibility is gonna be way more on you to make that an amenable place where people feel safe giving you feedback. Don't expect that it'll just come, even if you say you want it. You have to basically continually talk about why it's important to you. Model, what it will be when someone actually gives you news you don't want to hear. Maybe they're giving you critical feedback about how you conducted that meeting. Maybe they're talking about something you did that's contributing to the problem. But if you shut them down, then guess what? You're not going to hear that feedback again, and it's going to get worse, except it'll just be behind your back. So, if someone gives you hard feedback, are you humble? Are you listening? Are you taking action? Are you thanking them? Are you rewarding the people who take the risks to be able to go out of their way to tell you something difficult? And I'm always very wary of the red flags. If someone, comes up to me and says something like, oh, so-and-so didn't want me to tell you this, but then I'm always like, oh, what did I do wrong? Because if so-and-so isn't comfortable telling me, then clearly that is on me, and I need to go and figure out what can I do to make it so that so-and-so would then, feel like their first inclination is to let me know so that they can invite me in and we can, problem solve this together. So I think that being very self-reflective and continually, almost being humble about the fact that, that ultimately as the leaders, we must be responsible for that environment and be the first to model what it means to ask for feedback and receive it humbly and take action.
That's good. So speaking of feedback, give us your opinion about this compliment sandwich that we all have heard about. Give a good thing for the feedback and some more good compliments. What do you think about that?
Yes, I'm not really a fan of the compliment sandwich because I think the way that we've been taught it is if you have something difficult to say, first tell them something good. Then, put your meat in the middle and then follow it up with something good. And every time I've tried it, it just comes off being so inauthentic, right? Because the thing I really want to talk to you about is this thing that we need to work on. Then trying to pad it with some other fluff is just actually it's not helping either of us. And it kind of makes me look like I'm maybe scared to tell you and actually have the hard conversation. That said, I think that what we should do is just find ways to be able to help tell people what's going well when it's going well, and then have the direct conversations about the things that aren't going as well or that we think they need to hear. But do it in a way such that the person ultimately feels like you're doing it because you care about them, right? And I had to check myself. There's been times when sometimes I wanted to give feedback to someone, and it came out of a place because I wanted to be right, or because I wanted to sound smart, or because you said something that annoyed me the other week and I wanted to get back at you, right? And all of those are not the right intentions to start with giving critical feedback, because what I've learned is when you start there, guess what? The other person can tell, and they know, they can kind of read your intention, and they're not gonna stand for it, and then they'll be defensive, they're not gonna hear it. But if you go into a conversation, that with critical feedback, but your intent is pure. You're doing it because you genuinely want to help the other person. Or you genuinely want your relationship to be better, or you genuinely, really want to solve this problem with them. Then that will also be reflected in your body language. It'll be reflected in the way that you choose to go and have the conversation, the words you say, the way that it comes across, and that's going to go a lot better.
Oh, I love that. So last question, and then we're going to go to the audience. So if everybody's got the Socio app, you can ask questions. Just select this ballroom, and we will take some of your questions just after this one. So last question up here is, speaking of feedback, how do you not take feedback personally? Any advice from either one of you? It's tough, right? Like, how do you wash it, let it go, and take the nuggets?
Well, I'm an Aries, so I do take it personal. But as a manager, I've had to divorce my feelings from the solutions and the problems and realize that this is only making us better. And so creating, as Julie said, an environment in which feedback is a gift. And I know we've often heard that concept, but really modeling that behavior that it is a gift, right? And focusing on the feedback and finding ways how to make actionable solutions. And so for me, I'm one of those people that very much invested in how can I continue to get better and hone in on some of these skills. And so when you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you think about your self-actualization and some of the things that you need, I need that feedback from a manager. Like, that's important to me. I'm not gonna thrive in an environment where I'm never receiving feedback, be it good or bad. And so for me, that's one of the things that I need out of the environment that I'm working in. And I convey that to my manager. And so for me, I've learned to receive it as a gift. And so I think as any employee, it's important to be able to receive that, because you're never going to get better, or you're never going to move up if you don't get that feedback. And so, yeah, take it as a gift.
Yeah, and very similar. Like, the exercise, I always, like, whenever it hurts, when I'm like, oh, why, like, I've messed up, they're telling me this, I do this exercise where I'm like, let me imagine myself in 10 years. And let me imagine now that I've suddenly gotten so much, like whatever thing I'm getting feedback on, I've overcome, right? And I'm so much better. Will I go back and look at this and be grateful that I heard it? And the answer is usually yes. The answer is usually like, if you can get over the emotion of like how it feels like right now in the present, and kind of how much it sucks to hear that, if you project out 5 or 10 years and then try and look back, I'm sure, like, I can think of like 20 examples of where, like, critical feedback back then has made me all the better now.
And writing a book, right, Julie? I mean, you have an editor, so they're giving you feedback all the time. So you definitely becomes very sobering with the feedback.
I love that. Okay, so we're starting to get some questions. Thank you. So I'm just gonna pull some here. I'm a woman, and I manage men that are older. It's a bit intimidating. What advice do you have for this situation? Good question.
Good question.
Yeah. Either one of you wants to go at it?
Whenever I find myself in a situation where I feel maybe a little bit awkward about the person I'm managing, or I'm like, I'm not in that situation, or I'm not that person, how can I relate? I find the easiest thing is to, sometimes sit down in that one-on-one context and just try and like get to know them, and not assume that I know what they care about or what matters to them, but just to ask. And sometimes even say, look, I'm coming into this new, or I'm at like when I was a new manager, I wish I had said this, is like, I'm coming as a new manager, I don't have all the answers, but my job is to help you, achieve your goals, help our team achieve our goals, and I'm gonna need to do that, with your help and with your, your best input for the team. So I just want to sit down with you and understand, what matters to you, what do you care about, what do you think are some of the challenges that our team is facing, what ideas do you have, and just sort of start the dialogue that way. And then, just to sit back and listen. And through doing that, hopefully be able to then establish a rapport with that person, right? It isn't coming in and saying, I have all the answers, I'm so smart, blah, blah, blah. It's just to try and actually parrot that back and to just work on establishing that relationship of trust.
I love this question. This might be, okay. How do you, sorry, I cut you off. Did you want to answer that
no,
one?
I didn't.
Okay, because I want to get to some of these. Some of these are awesome. On the Socio app? So you need to, okay, so did you all go, I'm getting them, so some people are finding it. Maybe help your neighbor if you found it. On the bottom right-hand corner, it says ask. Are you seeing? So you go to the polls and panels, and then you tap onto that, and then you go into the ballroom, and then there should be an ask on the right bottom hand corner. Okay, I love this. How do you manage up if one of your hippos, or highly influential person with opinions, okay, is a micromanager. How do you manage that?
Wow.
You even have something about that one.
Micromanagers, I know for me, I don't function well with micromanagers, but I did for a long time have a manager that was a micromanager, and I found that he micromanaged me. I guess this is my assumption. I don't know if this is true because I don't know, so maybe I'm being biased, but he didn't know my role as well as I did, and so that was one of the ways in which he felt like he could stay on top of what was going on. And so at first I was annoyed by it, but then I realized I had to divorce my feelings from the situation and realize why he was doing this. And so for me, I then started to manage up by providing all the things that I knew were important to him. Mm-hmm. And so he was very much a statistics type of person. So whenever we met, whenever we talked, I had all of these things prepared for him. I was anticipating his needs because I realized that was the thing that made him feel like a good manager, like he was on top of things. And once he realized that I was ahead of the situation, he fell back a little bit. And then at one point, I then had to say to him, I've been in this role for a very long time. My work stands for itself. I'd really appreciate if we could function in this way. I think that would be better so that you get the best out of me. And having that hard conversation and hoping that he would receive it and practice courageous listening, and then we'd be able to move forward. And so I think for that was managing up, letting him know what I needed from him, because I could sit and stew in it at my desk and be upset, but if I never vocalized to him what I needed him to do or how we could work best together, then I think that I would have been working in a toxic environment or creating a toxic environment without having some of those conversations that need to be had.
No, that's good. Do you want to add anything to that one?
No.
Okay. Joss, lots of good questions. Thank you. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. How do you move forward in your power when you are aware of gender or racial biases in a work situation?
We can both answer.
How do I move forward in power? I think, to all the things that Minda was saying, sometimes it does matter to be able to have the conversation, right, with the manager, with the peer, because, otherwise these things, they just keep gnawing at us, and, it actually, I think, ends up making, I know in my experience, it's made me feel less powerful when I try and brush it under the rug, or when I just tell myself I'm gonna ignore it, because it's really hard to actually ignore it. It's really hard to not have the emotional response. So in some ways, taking control of the situation and remaining powerful is to sometimes address these things head on and have the conversation about what is bothering you if you feel like someone is continuing to do something that whether intentional or not is having that impact that makes you feel like it might be gendered, or it might be based on what you look like, or your background experience. So I think that is really important. I think the other thing, as Minda also mentioned, is sometimes it really, really matters for us to be able to have a network of support, because I know that, going in every day and being a manager, or, looking maybe like the only one or two people in the room that look like you, being able to have a group of people to whom you can say, hey, this thing happened. Is it normal? And then just hearing them say, no, it's not, and, sort of validating or confirming the things that you believe, that is really, really powerful as well. And that is the support that I think we need to bring to the table for each other, for all of us in this room. And I think that is why events like this are so powerful, because it isn't about, all of us have these interactions, but the more that we can find people for whom can make us feel more confident in our day-to-day, I think that's a huge part of the value of being able to go back into the workplace and being able to feel strong enough to have these conversations.
That's good. Two big themes that are kind of coming up, and we only have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to just mention the two themes, and then we can kind of dive however you want to do it. So one is seems to be a lot on managing up. Like, how do I manage up? Do I do the skip level meetings? What are those kinds of things that are going to help me do that? And this one I thought was really interesting. As a manager, sometimes you need to hire people that are smarter than you in certain areas. How do you ensure that they don't take advantage of that? So it's an interesting question, right? I love it. So which should we tackle first, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's important to hire people that are smarter than you whenever possible. But I think that it's important to establish those boundaries. I know when I was a young manager, I didn't establish good boundaries, and I thought that I needed to be friends with everyone, and then you move into being friends with everyone, and then you move into this managerial role, and it's very hard to sometimes maneuver that. But I think establishing really good boundaries has served me well, and it goes back to what we've been talking about, is owning our power. Sometimes as women, we give so much power away, and activating what we need, because we can't change the workplace when our voices are inaudible. So making sure you're talking to your managers or the higher ups in what you need. And so I think having those conversations are critical for our success, because we talk about the future of work, but what roles will we have as women if we don't activate our voice? If we don't tell our managers what we need, if we're not being good allies for the people who sit next to us, it's going to require us to educate ourselves, but then also have those conversations that we haven't been comfortable having for a long time.
That's great.
And what I'll add about managing up is, I think there's basically 3 things that that I always advise for people who are thinking about, like, how do I have these conversations with managers. The first is, does your manager know what you care about? And I advise everyone to just be really, really direct with your manager about what your goals are. Because if your manager doesn't know that you want to be a manager in 3 years, or you're looking to be the team lead, or you hope that you can be the lead on a project like X or Y, then they might not be, it might not cross their minds to be able to maybe find you the opportunities to do those things, right? Because otherwise, how will they know? And so be very explicit and clear, and just even be wildly ambitious with your manager about what you care about and how you want your career to look. I think the second question is, do you know what your manager cares about? And if you don't, that's a good series of questions to ask as well. Like, what keeps your manager up at night? What do they consider success for your teams to be? And if you know those answers, then you can similarly find opportunities where, if there's something that happens in a team and your manager cares about that, you could jump in, you could raise your hand, you could volunteer for those types of things, and that'll help your manager, that'll help their team. And then the final thing is to get to a place where you're constantly asking your manager for feedback, right? So once they know what you care about, what they care about, you want to invite them to constantly be able to help you calibrate how you're doing in growing your skills against the goals that you have. And you can always frame it in terms of, I told you that my goal was to get the promotion in 1 year. I would love your weekly feedback, monthly feedback, to help me understand where I am and what I can do to improve. And if you have those conversations with your manager all throughout, then it's not going to be a surprise when you have your performance review. It's not going to be a surprise whether that promotion is yours or not, because you have been, kind of with them, working together on it every step of the way.
No, that's awesome. Well, shoot, we're out of time. This has been so good. So first of all, I believe your books may be here on sale here or somewhere. If not, certainly on your phone somewhere, they will be available through your retailer of choice. But I wish everyone, I'm not going to say which one, but I would absolutely want you to join me in thanking Minda and Julie so much for their time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. And we'll dismiss you, but remember the keynote starts here at 4:30, so come on back for that. Thanks so much.